During the course of the next 5 or 6 days I hardly saw Zinaida. She gave it out that she was ill, which did not, however, prevent the habitual visitors from presenting themselves at the wing, to take their turn in attendance, as they expressed it, all except Maidanov, who immediately became dispirited as soon as he had no opportunity to go into raptures. Bylovzorov sat morosely in a corner, all tightly buttoned up and red in the face. On Count Malevsky's delicate visage hovered constantly a sort of evil smile. He really had fallen into disfavor with Zinaida and listened with particular pains to the old princess, and drove with her to the governor-general's in a hired carriage. But this trip proved unsuccessful and even resulted in an unpleasantness for Malevsky. He was reminded of some row with certain Puteyisk officers, and was compelled, in self-justification, to say that he was inexperienced at the time. Lushin came twice a day, but did not remain long. I was somewhat afraid of him after our last explanation and, at the same time, I felt a sincere attachment for him. One day he went for a stroll with me in the Neskuchny Park. Was very good-natured and amiable, imparted to me the names and properties of various plants and flowers, and suddenly exclaimed, without rhyme or reason, as the saying is, as he smote himself on the brow, and I, like a fool, thought she was a coquette. Evidently, it is sweet to sacrifice one's self, for some people. What do you mean to say by that? I asked. I don't mean to say anything to you, returned Lushin, abruptly. Zinaida avoided me. My appearance, I could not but perceive the fact, produced an unpleasant impression on her. She involuntarily turned away from me. Involuntarily, that was what was bitter. That was what broke my heart. But there was no help for it, and I tried to keep out of her sight and only stand guard over her from a distance, in which I was not always successful. As before, something incomprehensible was taking place with her. Her face had become different. She was altogether a different person. I was particularly struck by the change which had taken place in her on a certain warm, tranquil evening. I was sitting on a low bench under a wide-spreading elder bush. I loved that little nook. The window of Zinaida's chamber was visible thence. I was sitting there. Over my head, in the darkened foliage, a tiny bird was rummaging fussily about. A great cat with outstretched back had stolen into the garden, and the first beetles were booming heavily in the air, which was still transparent although no longer light. I sat there and stared at the window, and waited to see whether someone would not open it. And, in fact, it did open, and Zinaida made her appearance in it. She wore a white gown. And she herself, her face, her shoulders and her hands, was pale to whiteness. She remained for a long time motionless, and for a long time stared, without moving, straight in front of her from beneath her contracted brows. I did not recognize that look in her. Then she clasped her hands very, very tightly, raised them to her lips, to her forehead, and suddenly, unlocking her fingers, pushed her hair away from her ears, shook it back and, throwing her head downward from above with a certain decisiveness, she shut the window with a bang. 2 days later she met me in the park. I tried to step aside, but she stopped me. "Give me your hand," she said to me. With her former affection, "It is a long time since you and I have had a chat." I looked at her. Her eyes were beaming softly and her face was smiling, as though athwart a mist. "Are you still ailing?" I asked her. "No, everything has passed off now," she replied, breaking off a small, red rose. "I am a little tired." "But that will pass off also. And will you be once more the same as you used to be?" I queried. Zinaida raised the rose to her face, and it seemed to me as though the reflection of the brilliant petals fell upon her cheeks. "Have I changed?" she asked me. "Yes, you have changed," I replied in a low voice. "I was cold toward you. I know that, began Zinaida, but you must not pay any heed to that. I could not do otherwise. Come. What's the use of talking about that? You do not want me to love you, that's what. I exclaimed gloomily, with involuntary impetuosity. Yes, love me, but not as before. How then? Let us be friends. That is how. Zinaida allowed me to smell of the rose. Listen, I am much older than you know. I might be your aunt. Really? Well? If not your aunt, then your elder sister. While you? I am a child to you, I interrupted her. Well, yes, you are a child, but a dear, good, clever child, of whom I am very fond. Do you know what? I will appoint you to the post of my page from this day forth, and you are not to forget that pages must not be separated from their mistress. Here is a token of your new dignity for you, she added, sticking the rose into the buttonhole of my round jacket. A token of our favor toward you. I have received many favors from you in the past, I murmured. Ah, said Zinaida, and darting a sidelong glance at me. What a memory you have. Well, and I am ready now also. And bending toward me, she imprinted on my brow a pure, calm kiss. I only stared at her, but she turned away and, saying, "Follow me, my page," walked to the wing. I followed her, and was in a constant state of bewilderment. Is it possible, I thought, that this gentle, sensible young girl is that same Zinaida whom I used to know? And her very walk seemed to me more quiet, her whole figure more majestic, more graceful. And, my God, with what fresh violence did love flame up within me!